Hey everybody, it's me, Dave Splash from the Dark Stuff here. This video is a little bit different than my normal thing. This is going to be sort of an episode of my old podcast. For those of you not familiar, for a while I did, actually I've had like 3 or 4 different versions of the podcast, but it was the Dark Stuff podcast, and I interviewed various bands and artists and people involved in the music scene. Some in Omaha, some national artists, people like St. Vincent and Ace Frehley and stuff I interviewed. But this is an interview that I conducted on April 23rd of 2015 with Grant Hart, former drummer and singer in the band Hüsker Dü back in the 80s. He's also an accomplished solo artist and an accomplished visual artist in addition to that. The interview was actually arranged for my radio show, New Day Rising. New Day Rising comes from a Hüsker Dü album and song title, which I kind of thought Grant had more part of the writing. I thought him and Bob Mould both wrote it, but turns out it sounds like it's a little bit more Bob than Grant. He tells the story of it in the interview, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. This interview was done to promote a specific concert that was coming to Omaha in May of 2015. Grant was doing a 2-night thing here where it was showing off his visual art, and he had various pieces that he was selling. Then a screening of the documentary Everything, which is a documentary film about the life and times of Grant Hart. And then he would come out and do a set. And this was a 2-night thing. So I set up the interview to do it. And so Grant and I talked for about an hour in advance of the interview. I would say about 3 90-second clips from this interview were aired on the radio in advance of the show. The rest of the interview was never used, and I did my own sort of YouTube video a couple months ago, right after I interviewed Grant, talking about how psyched I was that I just interviewed him and it was going to be the return of my podcast and all that. I just realized recently that I need to stop bullshitting myself and people and saying that it's going to be coming shortly. Well, now it's months later and it never happened. So I don't want to let this interview go to waste and just let it sit there on the shelf, for lack of a better term. So here it is. This is the interview. As far as the visual stuff goes, all I did was go on YouTube and find music videos from Grant solo, from Hüsker Dü, from Nova Mob, his other band, and just sort of put them in the background. That's all you're looking at visually. So it's not super impressive visually. This is more of an audio thing, but my forum is YouTube, and so that's what we're going to go with. So if you're a Hüsker Dü fan, or if you're someone who's just interested in listening to long-form interviews with artists, I hope this will work for you. If you're looking for a video talking about records or talking about stereo equipment or whatever, this isn't the one for you, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't check it out. So here it is. Here's my interview with Grant Hart from Hüsker Dü. By the way, this is the entire interview minus about a 10-minute section that Grant asked me to keep off the record, and I'm honoring that request. All right. Hope you enjoy this. Thanks. Bye.
So I thought that we would start off with a little bit about the show, but before I even get there, since the radio show is called New Day Rising,
right?
Obviously you know where that came from. I was wondering if, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't at least ask you if you had any recollections about the creation of that song and if it holds any significance to you, because it obviously does to me because I named the show after it, but since I rarely ever talk to the actual man who wrote it, I thought I would start off there since the show is named after that.
Well, it was actually something Bob brought to the table, but we split the writing credit because the vocal arrangement, you know, is more complex than the chord structure, really. But I was real happy to see, you know, with him performing it with Jason and the new drummer, the drummer he's working with now. I forget his name, but
the guy from Superchunk. Yeah.
Kind of a.
Well, it's
I don't know. It's
well, you know,
to see Jason perform the pretty subtle harmony. I mean, it's powerful, but it's very subtle. There's a couple notes there that wouldn't really occur to somebody you know, it's a bit of discord that, you know, comes into its own into harmony as it's resolved. That I couldn't see a lot of people mimicking, but he did it very beautifully.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear.
Yeah.
It's always interesting.
You know, it's nicer
seen...
it's better to see Bob play with this band than, you know, like someone like Grohl, who doesn't really give the impression that he has studied Bob's stuff other than, you know, a cursory examination or a sing-along or something like that. These guys really listened to the work that he and I did together, and it's not like they're covering it. They're doing something else with it, especially Jason. I mean, drums aren't the melodic instrument anyway, but
right.
It's really nice to see some thought put into that rather than just throw it out as a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, well, one thing, you know, I've seen you a number of times back even the Nova Mob days and your solo shows, and I've seen Mold a bunch of times too, but what I always liked about your shows was you always were covering your entire career as opposed to separating it off and saying, well, I did this at this point, I did this at that point, which Mold used to always do, and I'm glad he doesn't do that anymore because it just seems kind of silly to separate it so much, but that's a side note anyhow. But
yeah, well, I think both of us went through different periods of, you know, in 1990, both of us seemed to be living in denial that we had even been in Hüsker Dü. When, you know, it doesn't take more than a 5-minute glance at a publishing statement to realize that that's this major portion of our lives.
Exactly. Okay, well, the show that you're doing, the two shows actually in Omaha, May 1st and May 3rd, it's being billed.
You won for the children.
Right, and the matinee for the kids. And what I'm wondering is this thing a traveling show that you're doing, or is
no?
It's
something that a few fellows in the Omaha area wanted to, you know, put a little something special together. I usually don't mix the visual art with the music in this way, but you know, it's a pretty unique situation. I'm not, outside of being the subject of the documentary, it really does, you know, just between you and me, it really doesn't mean a rat's ass to me. It's
right.
somebody else's project. I've seen it once for legal reasons, and I don't think.
So you don't sit through the screenings. You don't need to see it again. You lived it. It's not necessary, I guess.
Well, and also there's no need for me to hear one person's interpretation, evaluation, homage, whatever, because it's, you know, I don't want to be his version of that guy.
Right.
I want to be that guy. And, you know, the person selling the house doesn't like mow their lawn according to what the picture in the realty ad looks like.
Right. Well, speaking of that a little bit, so the film, what's weird about that is that the guy who made it did the opposite with you that he did with his Replacements movie, which was he features no one in the band, no music whatsoever, and it's just other people giving their perspective and telling old stories. Then the opposite with your movie, which is no other people telling stories or offering, and it was just focused on you. It's a very different approach. you know, I don't know. I feel like a mix of the two would have been a little bit better. You know, I mean, I don't know from your perspective whether you want to hear other people giving their opinion or not, but making a movie about.
Well, it's like it might as well be, you know, you talking about Gone with the Wind or Patton or some other film, as far as how much it really is needful for me to know, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so the show coming up is a unique show. Now, for those that, most people are probably aware that you've always done the visual art on your records and everything, and you've worked
for the most part. There's been a lot of deviation from that as well, but
well,
yeah.
What kind of pieces can people expect to see at the show?
This will be more like the collage work from the Argument packaging.
Okay.
The front cover of that is a aerial photo, not a satellite, but I believe a balloon picture of a meteorological effect called the von Karman effect, and he was a early scientific studier of like wind vortexes and liquid dynamics, and had a lot to do with figuring out how objects move through space, how wind is affected by stationary objects, how moving objects are affected by moving fluids and moving wind, and quite an interesting guy as well. He did a lot of work with Jack Parsons, who is kind of a interesting character as well.
Okay, I'm not familiar with him, so I
yeah, Jack Parsons was the Jet Propulsion Laboratory founder, who was also Aleister Crowley's chosen successor. But
oh, weird. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the guy lived in a lot of different worlds, and yeah. Von Karman was pretty eccentric in himself, and there's a whole school of free thinkers that it's a way of thinking, it's a creative way of observing, and there's a lot of eccentrics out there.
Oh, I believe me, I know that.
I think someone like Stephen Hawking, if he didn't have the physical maladies, he would still probably, be a very unique individual.
Absolutely. Well, you just mentioned your album, The Argument, so I wanted to ask you something about that. It was a 2013 album. It was a double album. It was a very dense concept album. And I know it was based on Paradise Lost, and also there was a tie-in with the William Burroughs story that I didn't quite know what that was.
Yeah, the Burroughs story is not published, but
okay.
In order to be really fair, I came to the Burroughs version of Paradise Lost. Let's say I read that entire thing before I read the entire Paradise Lost.
Okay.
One was, it was the gateway, and it was something that I felt an obligation to give him the thumbs up.
Now, will his version ever be available?
I have no idea. That would be up to the estate. It's not complete. And that was part of my instigation of the project is, I had seen 50 different versions of the first 3 books of Paradise Lost, and nobody takes it into the middle. They usually will jump from, book 3 to book 10. And there's a lot of religious regurgitation in the Milton version, but even so, everybody just kind of offers their own personal highlights of it, which I did as well.
Sure.
I took out things that I didn't think were pertinent to the story that I wanted to tell. I tried to, humanize the characters and, kind of take the shimmer off them a little bit.
Now, the record was very well received. I saw a million great reviews about it, and I know a lot of people were, talking about you again and everything. Is your next record going to be a similar sort of like a complicated record, a concept record, or is that not? You've done that now, or you've actually done that a couple of times in theory. What are you working on now in terms of new music?
I was already writing a dissimilar piece, but a shorter, connected song cycle that I'm working on recording. But it, is, what. How do you move up from Paradise Lost? Do you do, the Old Testament? I mean, what is what is bigger than Paradise Lost that is even conceivable? And not only that, but how do you fit it on to the vinyl format in a short enough version that, people can afford to buy it? This last one could have been, a triple without any difficulty whatsoever. It would have been easier, in fact, to have made the argument a triple record than a double, because, I would have been able to make shorter jumps and, be even more cohesive with it. But as it was, there were songs that had to be deleted just to make it releasable.
As a double?
Well, as something that people would be able to buy. I mean, how many, I've seen a lot of copies of, let's say, Sandinista and All Things Must Pass, and, at one time, Jesus Christ Superstar in the used bins, because, that's a lot of real estate for people to have in their, static record collection. It becomes more a commodity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to take in sometimes.
Yeah.
But you have a history of doing some concept records. The Last Days of Pompeii was sort of a concept record, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I guess Zen Arcade is considered something of a concept record. So it is an area that you touched on before, but you do seem to space them out 10, 15 years apart or so before entering into something that like that. So it would follow a pattern to then do something different on the next record, I guess.
Well, here's also my thought on it. It's, the jump from Hot Wax to the Argument, I felt there were a lot of people that were maybe brought into my music that might be expecting something, of a similar nature. So I wanted to, the record I'm working on is designed as a single record. And for some reason, single records are more remunerative to the record label than doubles are. I mean, they sell that many more copies. You have to actually sell record at a discount to release a double record because, you know, the cost prohibitiveness of, you know, you want your work to be affordable.
Right, especially now.
How many people buy a set of encyclopedias every 2 years?
And
I mean, they don't need encyclopedias anymore, but I mean, you know, it's not a request of the label or anything more than a, you know, act of gratitude on my part. You know, give the record label something that they can make money off of because they extended a great deal of faith by releasing, especially as an artist's first release on a label. You don't see too many labels debuting a quote-unquote new artist with a double record.
Well, will you be continuing to work with Domino in the future?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're a great label. They're doing really well.
We're very firm. Well, they're the only label that I thought would ever appreciate the argument. And they're the only label that I shopped it to. And Chris Gillespie and Lawrence Bell and 20 other staff members that I don't need to mention.
Sure.
But, you know, all very, very supportive. And you know, they got their payback in publicity. I mean, there's not too many Domino records that, you know, get that much favorable press. Favorable press for a record and good reviews is the best advertisement a label can have. Best advertisement an artist can have. And, you know, even though that we're past the time really where people have a favorite rock writer that they pretty much follow their recommendations, you know, word for word, there's still a certain suggestibility that they wield.
Well, it's great it's better to get good reviews than to get bad ones, I suppose. I mean, I'm not an artist.
Well, the right bad review doesn't hurt, but I agree.
Yeah. Well, moving on from that, but do you follow the careers of some of your old SST peers, like guys like Mike Watt or the Meat Puppets or any of them?
We're great friends, and as a matter of fact, I'm trying to engage Kurt in when he's in town in about a month to lay down a track on a song for the next record.
Oh, cool.
Watt, I see him every time he comes to town, and you know, we compare our latest aches and pains, but he's a hard-working man.
He definitely is. Always coming out with new groups and new things. He's one of those guys. You and he are very much, I feel, of the same mind, where you're just not willing to just do the same thing over and over. If you get inspired by something, you're going to follow it, not thinking, well, I don't know if the people who like this last thing are going to like this next thing. It's just, I'm just going to keep moving. And that's what I've always liked about your music, and I've always liked about Mike Watt's music too. But you just don't rest on what you've done in the past, you know, and it's appreciated by maybe not everybody, maybe a small group of people, just me and a handful of others, who knows, but it's definitely appreciated for sure.
Yeah, well, it's like, you know, as I'm moving through the musical world, you know, it's like how I move through the regular world. I go from one place to another place, and if there are people that end up at the second destination, that's great, that's fine. But, you know, if they're not, I don't wait for them to catch up.
Sure. Have you ever been tempted to just say, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna do an album that sounds like, New Day Rising or something, just to
Well, you see, I
up.
have. And it was called New Day Rising.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You threw me for a second there. I was trying to think, is he talking about Last Days of Pompeii or what? I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
You've already done it, right, exactly.
Yeah, and, if people are looking for something like that, they have it in spades with the original. Now, maybe as a as an exercise, they can make comparisons. I mean, I always think of okay, if Hot Wax is Metal Circus, then, the argument is definitely not Zen Arcade. What is, you're comparing them, and you're thinking of the moves that you made, and you're never, one thing that I've always found very interesting is I thought it was at one time a, great album, good album, great album, good album type of thing, but it's more complex than that, where from album to album, just how the changes are made. I'm offering up another, song cycle with the next records, but it is so completely miles apart from the argument.
Well, speaking of music, what kind of songs can fans expect to hear at your show? I mean, will you be doing a sort of an all-inclusive, all-career type of set, or how's that?
Well, I never go up with a prepared set list. And there's some times where that, is a gateway to some real fun shows. Sometimes it's kind of like, okay, what do you want to hear now? But, it'll be a mixed bag.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Well, the last thing I thought I would do is, for the interview is, a lot of people are familiar with the Hüsker Dü stuff and maybe less familiar with your post-Hüsker Dü stuff. So I was wondering if we could just briefly kind of touch on the various albums that you've done, and maybe just give brief sort of thoughts on them now as some of these albums are 25 years old, your first solo album, for example. Sort of what your thoughts on them are as you kind of reflecting back on when you made it. So starting with Intolerance, I guess, it was such a departure from what you had done with Hüsker Dü. And I guess what was the thought process? You were obviously trying to do something different, no doubt, right?
Yeah, and my guitar skills weren't, where they needed to be. There's a lot more keyboards and stacking of vocals, to cover for that. A couple of the things were things that are true to the way that I wanted them to sound, but were kind of taken back from Hüsker Dü. And so in a way, it's kind of it was an album I needed to make, for career reasons and, for the needs that the artist has. Sure. But if I would have had less of what I felt as a time pressure, it would have been a little bit more fulfilled.
Okay, so after Intolerance, you formed Nova Mob.
Yeah.
And that was the band you're with for another couple years. And the first record you guys did was The Last Days of Pompeii, which was a very complicated album that unfortunately at the time didn't get much attention because I guess
the problem was is Rough Trade went belly up literally a week after the release date. I got paid back the second half of the recording advance in sealed copies of the record at wholesale price. So it was, and of course I couldn't pay the bills incurred recording it in still sealed records of it. It was a setback when Rough Trade went belly up.
Sure. Now,
and
the album was reissued a few years ago, from what I understand. I still have my original copy, but is it a different version of the album? I mean, is there anything different about it?
It's simply remastered. Oh, wait.
Okay.
Last Days of Pompeii is, in fact, a remix.
Okay.
When I did Good News for Modern Man, while we were, putting together the deal, the same people that owned the studio owned the label that came out on. And it was my plan to make the record with the advances from the different people that I had lined up to license to overseas. And the label people had released records before. I didn't look at the U.S. market as being that significant to me at the time. And so basically I traded the rights to it in the U.S. for, about $1 million worth of studio time, during which very high prices.
Sure.
Pachyderm was, overpriced, marble drum rooms and that sort of thing. But also a fully automated board, which it was nice to mix two records on. But as part of that deal, I was remixing Last Days of Pompeii as well, getting ready to, collect all the little ducklings so that eventually, as I do now, I control my entire back catalog.
Sure, and I it's just a shame that the way that worked out, how the label went bust under it, because I've always loved that record and never thought it got a fair shake, and obviously it didn't because of situations at that time.
Yeah.
So the next record that you did would be the self-titled Nova Mob record, 2-3 years later than that. What are your thoughts on that now, and anything you recall about
the Restless Nova Mob record?
The Restless Nova Mob record, yeah.
Well, that was another strange business deal too, because I'd been actually talking to Rykodisc. Yeah, I've been haunted by business problems, and I've always fulfilled my end of the bargains. But anyway, so I was negotiating with Rykodisc, and because I thought, okay, if I'm on Rykodisc, which Bob was on Rykodisc at the time, then there would be some sort of détente that the label wasn't going to, be Grant Nasty, and my label wasn't going to be Bob Nasty. And because at that time, that crap was at a fever pitch.
Sure.
And the principals were waging that too. So, it's not just the businessmen. But Ryko said, well, in order to seal the deal, we want your engineer, Chopper Black, the same guy that mixed Intolerance, we want him elevated to the point of producer. And, well, what does that mean? Well, that means we will be paying him the money advance instead of paying it directly to you. And I said, well, I've already put money into the recording. Well, you'll get reimbursed by Chopper. Just work it out in contract with him. He's contracted to produce the record. And not only that, but he wants his payment up front just in case there's an overrun on time. In case we spend more, he wants to guarantee that his ass is covered. Well, who's going to be overspending on the budget? The producer. Right. So he's like, insuring. So I'm insuring him against himself or what? And not only that, but he wants his money up front. So I reached deep and gave him his full thing in advance. He decides that not only is he going to bring a friend of his into the picture, because they were going to be the Jimmy and Terry of punk rock. They were going to take what they knew and apply it to punk rock, because Nirvana, man, who would have thought that they would have been so valuable an act? And from the point he was under contract, he totally turned into, we're gonna make millions off of this punk thing. He had done like a lot of like dance oriented music and stuff. And originally when I had him mix Intolerance, it was because he knew how to get good drum sounds. He knew how to process things really well. And I was intrigued with bringing that into the picture. But anyway, after all this agreement has been made and he's been paid in advance, the Ryko Disc people say that, quote, they don't want to wage a war with their marketing department in order to sell my record. And I'm like, what do you mean? Doesn't your marketing department work for the label? Why would they decide not to market it? And it's like, well, the whole, conflict, you and Bob and you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like incredulous at this point in time. But anyway, they pass on the record. And as a last ditch effort, because this money has been spent in advance, Restless comes into the picture, and I sign a deal with Restless. Now, meanwhile, Chopper Black is like, hey, I'm under contract to produce your record. And he wanted to bring his guy in. All right. Same price. Okay. He also wanted to record it, not with one 24-track machine, but two 24-track machines linked up, where you have two tracks on one machine that are controlling what's called SMPTE code on the second machine, so that, they know where to link up and blah, blah, blah. But rewinding the tape in between takes like 5 minutes. If you hiccup in the middle of a vocal line, it's not just like rewind and record. It's like rewind, link up, rewind, total bullshit. And of course, by the end of the mixing of this, we have 9 people on the mixing console, because the automation has been overwhelmed by this many tracks. And we had to mix it according to plays on the football field. Okay, at such and such a point, the drums go up 1/2 a decibel. Just wow. just a technological nightmare. And on top of that, the one machine's tracks had to be mixed with a set of faders that actually came from a lighting console. And that one was a struggle. And in the meantime, the drummer that was working with us was emotionally falling apart, and it would literally take us a day to get one working track out of the guy. And, he's somebody that, I wish had a little bit more gumption, a little bit more confidence, because, every time he would fuck up, it would, the next track would be worse. And the guy was used to winging it, and, winging it can only carry you so far if you're not handling it.
So were you tempted to just jump behind the kid and do it yourself?
What's that?
Were you tempted to try and do it yourself after the problems with this drum?
I had the engineer going, you got to have a band meeting. You got to, you got to go in there and do it. And it's like, Tommy, the bass player, he's like, no way. How are we going to go on tour with this guy if we don't allow him to do that? And of course, he leaves the band within 5 months anyway. So yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Okay, so the next record in your catalog would be the Ecce Homo CD, the live CD.
Yeah, which we were on tour. I was actually playing drums at this point because the gigs were set up. Drummer leaves. Good thing I was there to play the drums, but I did not like that direction at all. And then Chris, the guitar player, decides he's going to stay in Seattle. Things hadn't been going along so well with him on that tour. And he's in the town where his sister lives. And we had an argument in downtown Seattle. And I said to him, well, I don't want this attitude to get inside the van with you. And so he opens up the side door, grabs his 4x4 guitar bottom and his amp and his guitar, and I guess he ended up taking a cab with that stuff to his sister's house. But he was not in the van, nor was his attitude. And we can kind of talk about it now. But what happened is Restless had put us together with, a friend of one of the office girls who was a tour manager. But he was also a recovering alcoholic. And when he slipped, one of the guys that was a recovering alcoholic traveling with us starts drinking as well, didn't live with us past Seattle. And when we reached Bellingham under contract, there's supposed to be a show. And fortunately, there was an acoustic guitar that I could borrow to play the set with, and it was being traded around. So in order to, cash in on the popularity of the bootleg, I sent the tapes off to World Service, remnant of the Rough Trade contract. And the only people in the rough trade world that stayed together up at that point, they've since gone back into business. But so that's what happened with Ecce Homo. And, first time back on guitar in like 6 months. And it ends up being a record. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so that was basically, I guess, the end of Nova Mob and the beginning, the reemergence.
Yeah, Tom and I tried to continue, and we ended up getting to Belgrade during the war, in fact, and that was very good as far as a fan move, because Nova Mob is looked upon quite heroically in the ex-Yugoslavia.
Now, were you guys playing as a duo then?
We did some work as a duo, but usually he was accompanying me physically, but not musically.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just traveling along.
Okay. Well, then the next record you did was the Good News for Modern Man record.
Yeah.
From 1999. And that one was a definite departure from Nova Mob, and is different, I think, than anything else that you've done before. What are your thoughts on that one now, looking back?
Well, it was, I was kind of like experimenting around, trying to figure out if I wanted to stay in the music business, and of course, I wanted to, and had I known how it would have turned out, 2 years later, I might not have, but if I had known how it would have turned out, 15 years later, I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah. And when you say the way it turned out, you mean the way it turned out in terms of sales, or the way it turns out in terms
just
of
the way the business
part of
going
it,
tits up, it's like when you put a lot into a record, and the deal that we made didn't cover the expenses, that were incurred before the deal. I mean, there was no cash that changed hands with that Nova Mob. I mean, with that Good News from Modern Man.
Okay. Well, it's, in retrospect, it's a great record, and I hope people who are familiar with your music will.
You know what?
They'll still find it.
You're popping in and out because my battery has been saying that it's dead.
Oh, okay. Well, should we wrap it up then?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for doing the interview, and I will see you at the show on May 1st.
Sounds real good.
All right. Thanks, Grant.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, so thanks a lot for watching. That was the entire interview. We got kind of cut off there at the end. Something was going on with Grant's phone, or he just got tired of talking to me, and that was the end of the interview. But we had been speaking for over an hour, and, it had been quite a bit. So if we had continued going, he would have talked about the Hot Wax album that he came out with, and then a further discussion of the album The Argument, which is his most recent album from, I think, 2013 or 2014, when that one came out, a double album on Domino Records, which is, at the time that I'm filming this, the most current record that he's made. So, all right, everyone, thanks a lot for watching. This has been me over here at The Dark Stuff. Thanks. Bye-bye.